Hi, I'm Shanley. My mother introduced me at a charity gala as just a janitor in front of 300 donors, then raised her glass like it was a toast. They laughed. My sister smiled. My father stared at his plate, but none of them expected the mayor to stand, salute, and say, "Secretary of State, hi, madam." You'd think that would have been the worst part, but it wasn't. The worst part was knowing the erasure wasn't an accident. It was a strategy, years in the making. My name left off the brochure, my donation claimed by someone else, my life rewritten in someone else's voice. And the question I still ask is, what do you do when the people who raised you are the first ones to bury you? Would you still show up? The day I returned from Istanbul, the air in D.C. had that dry, electric crispness that clings to your coat and tells you, without fanfare, that you're no longer overseas. I dropped my suitcase just inside the apartment, slipped off my heels, and checked the mail stacked by the door. I wasn't expecting anything important, just the usual stack of donation letters, bills, and glossy real estate ads. But one envelope stood out. Cream cardstock, embossed border, no handwriting on the front, just printed, "Guest of Barbara Maddox." I didn't open it right away. I stood there, staring at it, trying to decide if this was a test or a trap. 16 years working international diplomacy had taught me to spot both, and this smelled like both. My mother didn't send letters. She sent reminders. This one, it didn't even bother to name me. Eventually, I peeled back the flap. Inside, the Maddox family cordially invites you to the Charleston Spring Charity Gala. No date listed beyond a generic Saturday, March 18th. No personal note, just those printed gold foil words and that same cold, curated absence. Not "Dear Shanley," not "We hope you'll attend." Just "Guest of Barbara Maddox." I held the invitation between my fingers, tilting it toward the light like it might reveal a secret in its sheen. "Even now," I murmured, "I'm an accessory to their appearance, not their family." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it wasn't surprising. They hadn't sent an invite. They'd sent a warning, a little reminder that even now, after a Senate confirmation, a cabinet position, and more time in war zones than most generals, they still saw me as the one who didn't fit. I placed the envelope on the kitchen island, poured myself a glass of water, let the silence wrap around me like static. Then I walked to my desk and powered up my laptop. If they wanted a performance, I needed to see the playbill. The Charleston Gala had its own website, as glossy and bloated as my sister Zineia's Instagram page. I clicked through the Our Sponsors tab, and there it was, buried halfway down the list. S. Maddox, silver tier. My name, printed in light gray, smaller font, no title, just below that, bold and gold, Zineia Maddox, platinum host, legacy contributor. It wasn't a mistake. It was a message, one they'd rehearsed for years. I stared at that screen for longer than I should have. The glow of it lit the room like a small fire, and I let it burn. My mind reeled back, not to a specific moment, but a pattern. The time they cropped me out of the family photo for the Christmas card. The speech at Zineia's graduation where my name wasn't mentioned, even though I paid her final semester after Dad's account got frozen. The look on Mom's face every time someone asked, "What does your other daughter do again?" Sometimes absence is louder than presence, and sometimes silence is just a polite way of saying, "Don't come." I stood up, walked across the room, and opened the drawer I rarely touched. Inside, a letter, old, still sealed, postmarked from Charleston 5 years ago. My father's handwriting. He'd sent it just before the surgery he never woke up from. I'd never opened it. I picked it up, turned it over in my hands, It felt heavy for just one sheet of paper. I placed it next to the invitation, side by side. Two ghosts, one dead, one refusing to see I was still alive. I didn't hit RSVP, not yet. Instead, I stared out the window at the city I'd bled for, the city that called me secretary, while the people who raised me still called me invisible. If they didn't see me, who would? I arrived at the Dewberry just before 7. The valet didn't recognize me, not that I expected him to. I wasn't in the kind of dress that turned heads, and I wasn't wearing the kind of jewelry that made people ask whose wife I was. My black gown was simple, sleek, deliberate. I didn't come to be seen. I came to be undeniable. Inside, the hotel's ballroom buzzed with the kind of orchestrated elegance Charleston was famous for. Crystal chandeliers shimmered. Polished wood floors carried the soft click of heels and murmured greetings. The scent of lemon polish and money hung thick in the air, familiar. I moved toward the seating chart like someone checking their own name at a wedding they were never truly invited to. Names floated in flourishes: Dr. Langley, Judge Carmichael, the Honorable Zineia Maddox. I scanned line after line. Nothing. Then, at the bottom, squished beside the catering list, J.K. Doe, Janitor, Table 16. It took me a second to realize it was me. Not even my initials were right, just a placeholder, a joke. Table 16. Right by the kitchen corridor. I looked toward it. It was the only table with folding chairs instead of chiavari. The linen didn't quite reach the floor. One leg was propped with a sugar packet. They couldn't erase me, so they reduced me. I made my way over without a word. I passed Vera on the way, her hair shellacked, pearls as usual, that smile she wore for press and funerals. She didn't look at me. She didn't need to. The message had already been delivered. At the table, a small card waited. Beige. Everyone else had ivory. Mine said, janitorial lead. No prefix, no last name, no title. Across the ballroom, place cards sparkled with Doctor and Senator and CEO. I was a punchline on cardstock. People don't humiliate you with accidents, I thought. They do it with intent, disguised as oversight. I pulled out the chair slowly, feeling the metal legs wobble on the uneven floor. Sat down. Adjusted my posture. I'd sat through tougher rooms than this. A server approached with practiced ease and placed a plate in front of me. Chicken breast, overcooked green beans, a sad dollop of mashed potatoes. "Apologies, Ms." He leaned in, voice low. This one was labeled for staff in the kitchen queue. His eyes flickered down, then back to mine. "We can replace it." I shook my head. "No need," I said calmly. "Seems appropriate." He looked startled, nodded, and stepped away. I picked up the fork, took a bite. Bland? Predictable? Perfect. From across the room, I caught snippets of laughter. My name, well, the title, wasn't spoken, but I saw a few people glance my way, smirk, lean into someone's shoulder. Their eyes slid past me like I was a part of the wall, or maybe a stagehand, background. But I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I'd stood in front of foreign ministers who tried harder to make me invisible. Instead, I pulled out my notebook. The small, leather-bound one I always kept in my purse. Opened it. Began writing. Nothing too detailed, just a line. They positioned me by the trash. Forgot I'd been trained in battlefield diplomacy. People underestimate you right before they lose control of the story. I kept writing. Let the music swirl around me. Let the wine flow at other tables. Let Zineia bask in her curated spotlight. I'd let her think this was her stage for now. But then I looked up, and there she was, Zineia. She was seated across the room at the head table, surrounded by local politicians and foundation donors, champagne flute in hand. Her gown gleamed. Her hair was pinned in a way that screamed magazine spread. She raised her glass in my direction, not in welcome, not in kinship, but in mockery. She didn't even smile, just held the toast long enough for me to feel it was meant for me, and only me. I closed the notebook, sat still, because I knew what came next. The lights dimmed right as the second course was cleared. I was still seated at the outlier table near the corridor, a half-empty glass of wine in front of me, my plate barely touched. The clink of cutlery softened, and a screen descended at the far end of the ballroom. Someone tapped a mic twice, then said, "Please enjoy a special presentation celebrating the Maddox legacy." Music began to play, something soft and sweeping, like it belonged in a commercial for vacation homes. The screen flickered to life. A slideshow began. It started innocently enough, Mom and Dad in their younger years, dancing on a pier, Zineia in pigtails, holding a ribbon at a science fair, my older brother Zachary tossing a football in a perfectly framed backyard. My name wasn't said, but I waited. Maybe I'd show up next. Maybe this time I wouldn't be a ghost. More photos rolled by. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, beach trips. I recognized them all because I had been there. I bought the cake in that third birthday photo, took the picture of Mom and Zach by the lighthouse. I wasn't in any of them. Then, for a split second, one photo flashed that almost included me. I knew the frame. It was from Zineia's college graduation. I was standing to the side, holding her coat. They'd cropped the image, but my arm was still visible, reaching in, holding something just outside the camera's interest. That was it. My contribution. A disembodied elbow. I set down my glass carefully. I didn't react. I didn't turn to see who else noticed. That was the power of editing. You didn't have to scream to make someone vanish. Just as the lights began to come up, someone tapped me on the shoulder. I turned. "Shanley?" he asked. A man in his 40s, balding a bit at the crown, expensive suit, loosened tie. Familiar in a way I didn't immediately place. "I'm Trevor," he added. "Zineia's friend from undergrad. We met years ago." "I think you were coming back from some deployment?" My mouth stayed neutral. "That sounds about right." He smiled like he was fishing for something kind. "She always talked about you, said you worked janitorial overseas, right? Albania, wasn't it? That's real salt-of-the-earth work. Honestly, we need more of that kind of humility in this country." I tilted my head slightly. "Sure." He nodded, pleased with himself. "Good to see you again." As he walked away, I stared down into my glass. It wasn't enough to erase me from the frame. They had to rewrite the caption too. Outside, the evening air was cooler than expected. I stepped onto the terrace without speaking to anyone. The buzz of the ballroom softened behind the thick glass. I leaned against the stone railing and looked out toward the street below. Cars lined the curb. Valets opened doors with mechanical precision. Somewhere inside, another round of applause erupted, probably for the chicken. A memory surfaced, one I hadn't invited. I was 13. I'd mailed home a photograph from my summer trip abroad. I'd saved up for that trip, working double shifts at the campus library. I remember handwriting a note on the back. "First time seeing the Alps." I never got a reply. A few months later, I saw the same photo stuck to the refrigerator door, but the note had been whited out and Zineia's name written underneath in thick black Sharpie. "When people don't want to remember you," I whispered, "they don't forget. They delete." I stayed outside long enough to watch the lights shift across the ballroom, long enough to feel my spine straighten. I wasn't sad anymore. I wasn't hoping. I was just done. When I stepped back in, I didn't drift. I walked directly to my seat, set my glass down, pulled out the notebook again. My hand didn't shake. If they wanted an invisible daughter, I'd let them watch the ghost speak for herself. I raised my glass, not to anyone, not in a toast, just lifted it as if marking a moment in time, then drank, not in bitterness, in preparation. The applause began just as I finished a sip of the wine I didn't want. My glass was down when I heard it. Let's take a moment to thank our platinum benefactor for their exceptional contribution to the Global Literacy Initiative. I didn't react at first. Not when the words legacy gift floated across the room, not when the MC's voice took on that over-rehearsed warmth. But then I heard her name, Zineia Maddox. She stood up slowly, like she was shy about the recognition. The room clapped harder. Someone whistled. Another guest called out, "That's our girl!" And she smiled, modest, elegant, orchestrated. It hit like a gut punch wrapped in silk. I didn't move, just felt the corners of my mouth tighten as the words rolled on. Her generous donation of $100,000 will fully fund the first phase of our outreach program to underserved school districts abroad. Her vision and heart for education will impact lives for generations. The check I wrote had no name on it. I'd requested it stay anonymous. For the kids, for the mission, I hadn't needed credit. I'd needed change. They knew, I told myself. They used it. The gall wasn't in the lie, it was in how easy it came. A moment later, I reached for the brochure tucked under my plate. The program had a glossy feel, pages thick like pride. I flipped to the sponsorship list. Platinum tier, Zineia Maddox, Educational Legacy Champion. Silver tier, blank. My name didn't appear at all, not Shanley Maddox, not Secretary of State, not even anonymous, just nothing. I reread the words 3 times before I stopped pretending to be surprised. Legacy Champion, I muttered under my breath. She took my legacy and printed her name on it. I hadn't even known she was involved with the program. Last I checked, her philanthropy was limited to photo ops and charity brunches with influencers who spelled impact like it was a brand deal. A woman in a red suit appeared beside our table. I recognized her as one of the board members from the foundation, a name I'd seen on grant letters, polite emails, summary decks. "Oh, Zineia," she gushed, clasping her hands around my sister's. "We are just so grateful for your contribution. You're such a beacon for women in leadership. Honestly, it's women like you who give this work credibility." Zineia did her practiced blush, lowered her lashes, and said, "I just felt called to give." That was it. No deflection, no correction. She knew what she was doing. I placed my glass back on the table a little harder than I meant to. It made a sharp noise against the wood, cutting the praise mid-sentence. No one looked at me. Of course not. I leaned in, just enough so she'd hear. "You know whose name was on that check," I said. She didn't flinch. Her smile didn't even twitch. "Prove it," she replied. Quiet, casual, cruel. The board member glanced between us, slightly thrown, but Zineia turned her attention right back, steering the conversation like nothing happened. I sat back, inhaled slowly, and replayed every decision in my head. Every time I chose silence, every moment I gave them space to do the right thing without being forced. Every ounce of grace I handed them thinking they'd eventually see. But silence hadn't made me noble, it had made me editable. I reached for my phone, slid my thumb across the screen, opened the bank app. There it was, the image of the cashier's check, my signature, the routing code, the memo line, for Literacy Program Phase 1. No aliases, no guessing. They wanted a show, I could give them one. but I wouldn't shout. I wouldn't throw a drink or slam a door or make a scene. That wasn't my language. Truth was, the ballroom fell into a hush as the MC adjusted the microphone and smiled too wide. "And now," he said, "a few words from the heart of this family. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Vera Maddox." Chairs shuffled as people turned toward the head table. My mother stood with her usual composed grace, the kind that made you believe she ran on tension and lemon-scented linen. She held her glass with 2 fingers and smiled like someone who had been rehearsing her toast for years. "Thank you, everyone," she began, her voice soft but sharpened with that southern-laced control. "What a night! What a legacy!" She looked around the room as if taking inventory of the power it held. Then, her eyes landed on me. "And my youngest," she added, with the kind of smile you give right before pulling the rug. "Well, she's made quite the living keeping places tidy. Just a janitor, but at least she's punctual." Laughter. First a ripple, then a wave. It rolled through the room like it had been waiting all night for that release. Someone at table 4 coughed out, "Guess that explains the mop of silence," and the laughter renewed, bolder this time. A woman 2 seats down chuckled so hard she leaned into her husband, whispering something he nodded at with mock sympathy. I didn't move, didn't blink. My fingers tightened around the base of my wine glass, not enough to lift it, just enough to feel it exist. Across the table, Zineia giggled, eyes gleaming. She turned and clinked glasses with a man I didn't recognize. My father. He sat back, eyes down. He didn't laugh, but he didn't stop it either. The room blurred for a second, not from tears, but from the sharp edge of humiliation carving a clean path through my spine. This wasn't just a joke. It wasn't even mockery. This was branding, public, deliberate, and permanent. I looked at my mother. She didn't look away. If anything, she held my gaze with a kind of passive defiance, like she was daring me to object, as if to say something, make it worse. I thought about standing. The chair beneath me shifted slightly as my weight lifted, and I paused. My hand hovered over the clutch in my lap, but I didn't rise. Not yet. Not here, I told myself. Not like this. Instead, I reached for my glass and took a sip. My throat was dry, but the wine went down like strategy. I placed the glass back gently, deliberately. Let the room settle again. Let them believe I'd swallowed it all, because that's what they expected. The quiet daughter, the shadow, the one who never corrected anyone when they got her job title wrong or claimed her effort as theirs. But inside, something shifted. Not a collapse, a realignment. I reached into my clutch and pulled out the letter, folded, pristine, still sharp at the corners. The original donation confirmation. The one signed by me, counterstamped by the Department of State, with the exact amount that funded the program my sister now took credit for. I didn't unfold it. Not yet. I just held it in my hand, under the table. Next time someone said my name, it would be with the title they'd conveniently forgotten. The laughter died down. The next name was called, and then the mic passed to Zineia. Zineia was still glowing under the warm hum of applause, nodding in that demure way she'd perfected. One hand over her chest like she hadn't expected the praise, the other cradling her champagne flute. She gave a half wave to the MC, who beamed back like they were co-hosting a telethon. I sat motionless, not cold, not jealous, calculated. A waiter stepped onto the stage, carrying a large white envelope on a silver tray. It was placed ceremoniously next to the podium, just below the microphone. No one noticed. The room's attention stayed fixed on Zineia. But I knew what was inside. I'd sent it myself. The seal bore the gold-embossed crest of the United States Department of State. They hadn't read it yet. And judging by how the schedule was unfolding, they hadn't planned to. A letter from the government thanking a cabinet-level official quietly brushed aside to keep the story simple, neat, marketable. My eyes moved back to Zineia as the auctioneer picked up the mic again. Next, we have a very special donation. A vintage pearl and sapphire necklace donated by none other than Zineia Maddox herself, a cherished family heirloom passed down for generations. Bidding starts at... I stood up before I realized I had... That necklace, I said, not loud but firmly, belonged to Grandma Elise. You never even met her. The auctioneer faltered mid-sentence. Zineia turned slowly toward me, her smile thinning. I found it in the attic, she said, not missing a beat. But I wore it better. There was a small ripple of nervous laughter. I didn't smile. I walked forward, not fast, not slow, just steady, every step deliberate, as if I'd choreographed it months ago. The room didn't quite hush, but the sound shifted. People noticed. I reached the podium, picked up the envelope, and carefully broke the seal. I didn't need the microphone. I didn't want it. The Department of State extends its appreciation, I began, voice clear, to the Honorable Shanley Maddox, Secretary of State, for her contribution to international education initiatives and the Global Literacy Fund. I glanced up. No one interrupted. I kept going. This event is co-sponsored by the department and made possible by Secretary Maddox's direct and personal donation. Her support honors the mission of education across borders and generations. I folded the letter again. Zineia looked pale. Vera, for the first time that night, looked older than her pearls. A long second passed. One person clapped, then another. I handed the envelope to the MC, who took it without speaking. I turned to face the room. I don't need the stage, I said softly. I just needed the record corrected. Then I walked back down the center aisle, and for the first time since I'd arrived, people moved out of my way. They didn't avert their eyes. They followed me. Some with embarrassment, some with something close to respect. I didn't sit when I got back to my table. I didn't need to. I stood beside my chair, shoulders square. Across the room, the mayor stood. His eyes met mine, and in that quiet moment, I knew the dynamic had shifted, not just between me and them, but across the entire room. The applause from my quiet revelation hadn't fully settled when Zineia rose to her feet. She didn't miss a beat. Not a crease in her smile, not a falter in her step. Her heels clicked with practiced precision as she made her way to the microphone. She gave the room a look that said, "You've all been so gracious," even before opening her mouth. Thank you," she began, placing a hand lightly over her chest. "I'm just honored to be part of this wonderful night and this wonderful family." The word family floated through the room like perfume, sweet, deliberate, nauseating. She paused and looked toward my table. "And of course," she added, voice lilting with charm, "we even had some extra help from the staff tonight. My sister's always been good at cleaning up, emotionally and literally." It landed like a gut punch wrapped in velvet. Laughter erupted. Some people turned to glance at me, not with sympathy, not with shame, but amusement. A few guests laughed too hard, as if trying to signal allegiance to the room's reigning queen. I didn't blink. I didn't shift in my seat. They don't even call it sabotage. They call it wit. The MC stepped back in after her speech, clearing his throat with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "We were supposed to have a brief word from Shanley," he said with the kind of tone used for traffic updates, "but we're a little tight on time." No one looked shocked. No one looked at me, except Zineia. Her smile curled into something cooler, knowing. She took her seat and sipped her drink as if she'd just performed a ballet. I folded my hands in my lap, didn't say a word, didn't need to. My silence rang louder than the applause she'd just finished collecting. The clink of a tray jolted the moment. A server passing behind me caught the edge of a guest's chair and stumbled slightly. A glass tipped and a few drops of wine landed near my foot. Before I could move, Zineia was suddenly beside me. "Oh dear," she said, fishing a small towel from the bar tray. "Here, maybe she can help." She turned to the crowd. "She's got the hands for it." The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. They cut precisely because of how soft they were, like a blade drawn through water. I looked at her, slowly, as if seeing her through a new lens. "You're not clever," I said evenly. "You're just cowardly in couture." That landed. She laughed. Forced. Brittle. A few people nearby chuckled reflexively, unsure of what side to take. But some didn't laugh. A woman 2 rows back tilted her head. A man near the MC furrowed his brow. Something was changing. Zineia turned and walked away quickly, heels tapping faster than before. I checked my watch, not because I needed the time, but because the moment was shifting and I wanted to mark it. There's always a moment before a system collapses, when the smug don't realize their script has changed. And then I saw him. The mayor, Killian Strauss, rose from his chair at the back of the ballroom. He wasn't smiling, and when a man like that stands up, everyone feels the shift. The air inside the ballroom changed before I saw him move. There wasn't a sound, just a shift, like when birds fall silent in the trees before a storm. I turned my head and saw Mayor Killian Strauss rise slowly from his chair near the back. His suit, dark charcoal, caught the soft gold of the chandelier light. His expression wasn't angry. It was surgical. He didn't say a word, just pushed back his chair, smoothed the front of his jacket, and began to walk, one step at a time, deliberate, unhurried. The kind of pace that made people watch before they realized they were doing it. By the time he passed the second row of tables, the room had gone nearly still. Even Vera glanced up. Killian reached my table and stopped 2 feet from me. No introduction, no hesitation. He stood at full attention, his back straight as if he were still in uniform. Then he spoke. "Madam Secretary." The silence broke like glass. A woman at the next table gasped audibly. Someone dropped a fork. The clatter echoed too loud in a room full of people who suddenly didn't know where to look. Killian's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "This woman," he said, turning slightly to face the audience, "has represented this country more times than most of you have clapped tonight. She's signed peace accords, negotiated ceasefires, and rebuilt nations you can't pronounce. Show her the respect she's earned." He didn't look at Vera, but she heard every syllable like it was carved into marble. Zineia sat frozen, her champagne flute paused mid-air. The bubble in her throat never made it to a smile. Someone stood, then another. A slow, unsure clap started from the right side of the room. It was hesitant at first, but it grew. Not thunderous, but enough to make every seated guest feel the shift. Vera opened her mouth, just slightly, but nothing came out. She didn't stand. She didn't clap. She just sat there, hands folded tightly in her lap, her pearls reflecting the light with the same cold sheen they always had. I didn't gloat. I didn't bow. I simply nodded to Killian, then glanced toward the room. A breath passed between us. He stepped back respectfully. I didn't need a mic. I didn't need to speak. Because sometimes, when the right person says your name, the whole room finally hears it. And I had learned long ago, you don't need to scream when the truth finally walks into the room wearing someone else's shoes. I turned toward the stage, sensing something else shifting. The MC, now visibly rattled, held an envelope in his hands. His fingers hovered over the seal as if unsure whether to open it. His voice cracked slightly as he leaned forward into the mic. "And now, we'd like to read a letter from the U.S. Department of State." The MC unfolded the letter like it had just begun to heat in his hands. He cleared his throat, adjusting his posture as though he were now aware that eyes weren't just watching, they were measuring. "This next message," he began, "is from the United States Department of State." Every fork paused mid-air. He read aloud, slow and formal. "On behalf of the Department of State, we extend our deepest gratitude to the Honorable Shanley Maddox, Secretary of State, for her leadership and personal financial contribution to the Global Literacy Initiative." You could hear the syllables land, each one heavier than the last. She is recognized not only as a distinguished diplomat, but as the sole donor behind the initiative that anchors tonight's mission. A single cough echoed. Then, nothing. No clapping, no whispers, just a silence so precise it felt sculpted. My name was spoken twice, my title repeated. No Zineia, no Maddox family, just me. I didn't move. I let it hang there. Truth doesn't need applause, just clarity. The screen behind the MC lit up, cueing the Maddox Legacy tribute. A video started, warm piano music weaving beneath childhood footage, and there I was, in every shot. It was my footage, images from my deployments, my speeches abroad, meetings with foreign ministers, ribbon cuttings at rebuilt schools, clips that had taken years to gather. But the narration, "Zineia Maddox," the voiceover said, calm and polished, "International Ambassador of Goodwill, a pillar of modern diplomacy and global compassion." My spine didn't stiffen, my jaw didn't clench. I just turned and began walking toward the media booth. "Wait," someone whispered in the crowd. "Isn't that?" I heard it ripple across the room. "Wasn't that her? Isn't she the secretary?" I reached the MC's station. He stood awkwardly, hands gripping the podium edge. I pulled out my phone, opened a folder, and held the screen up. The same video, same visuals, but with my voice narrating, calm, clear, unapologetic. "That wasn't a mislabeling," I said. "That was a replacement." He looked over my shoulder toward Vera, who hadn't moved. Her face was blank, her posture perfect. I turned, walked toward the front row where the foundation document sat. An old colleague had slipped me the original file earlier that evening, sponsorship forms signed with my name and seal. But the version displayed in the program listed Vera Maddox, Legacy Sponsor. I laid the two copies side by side on an empty chair at the main table. No fanfare, no flourish. I spoke not to the room, but to myself. It's not revenge, it's restoration. A low murmur began, first from the far side of the room, then behind me, a rustle of realization, of discomfort, of a structure beginning to crack. Then Vera stood. She didn't look at me. She stepped forward slowly, quiet in her movement, straight-backed. Her eyes locked on the two documents resting beside the floral centerpiece. She reached out, her hand hovering just above the paper bearing the signature she knew wasn't hers, but she didn't touch it. She looked at it like it might burn her, and she just stood there. It didn't take long after the forged signature sat exposed on that velvet-covered chair. The murmur had turned to murmurs, and then into actual names. I heard mine, spoken in full for once, not just an initial or an awkward half-smile at my presence, not whispered with speculation, but with confirmation. The MC's voice cracked slightly as he read the final line from the department's letter. "This recognition stands regardless of familial context." That line hit harder than anything else, not because of what it said, but because of what it didn't have to. The room sat with it, uncomfortable in a way expensive lighting couldn't distract from. And then, the most unexpected thing happened. A man from the waitstaff, no older than 30, stepped toward me. He held nothing in his hands, no tray, no wine glass, just a stillness that cut through the noise like a hallway draft. "Ma'am?" he said gently. I turned, expecting a question, a spill, maybe a polite redirect. But he nodded and said, "You visited Ramstein 2 years ago. You spoke to us about home and what to do with silence." It took me a second. His face came back to me, blurred by years and 100 deployments, but yes, it was him. I remembered his posture, the slight limp in his left step. His eyes then had held doubt. Now, something else. He saluted me, not sharp like Killian's, but personal, real. "Thank you," he said, and walked away. And that was when I saw the next domino begin to tremble. Zineia. She was surrounded by 2 board members, both leaning in uncomfortably close. One of them whispered something I couldn't hear, but the second looked directly at her, eyes narrow. "We'll need a correction," she said, voice louder than she intended. "Or this becomes our headline." Zinnia's mouth opened, but no sound came. Her fingers trembled around her wine glass, the same glass she'd lifted in so many interviews. The same hand she used to sign interviews she didn't earn. Her brand was unraveling, and not because I pulled the thread. It was because it had never been stitched right in the first place. I felt her eyes on me, but I didn't offer her a reaction. I didn't owe her that anymore. Then Vera stood, not suddenly, not with drama, just stood. She didn't reach for the mic. She didn't fix her dress. She walked carefully to the edge of the ballroom where the main aisle met the exit. And then she stopped. Our eyes met. This time she didn't blink. She parted her lips like she might speak. But no words came. She searched for something behind my expression, approval, forgiveness, maybe just a signal that she could still control the scene. I gave her nothing, and then she nodded. Once. Slight. Enough. The room saw it. Everyone saw it. And I turned. Not out of rage, not to make a scene, just because I was done. I walked slowly toward the exit, letting my heels fall with purpose, my shoulders square, my silence full. At the door, a flash went off. A photographer. I hadn't seen him, but he'd seen me. That picture would circulate within the hour. But for once, I didn't flinch. There are moments when truth doesn't shout. It simply refuses to leave quietly anymore. The air outside the ballroom tasted different, cooler, real. The manicured warmth of the gala couldn't stretch past the stone portico, and I was grateful for it. I stood alone beneath the amber sconces, the door still ajar behind me. The hum of laughter and clinking glasses barely reached this edge. I reached up and pulled off the name tag I never wore. The adhesive was still tacky. "Guest of Barbara Maddox," it read. I folded it once, then again, and dropped it into the trash bin next to a column of ferns. They didn't apologize, they just got quiet. That was the real ending. Not a speech, not a tearful reunion, just a silence that came too late to matter. Then I heard him. Footsteps, slow, familiar. "Shanley," my father said from behind me. I didn't turn. I waited. He stepped closer, enough for his shadow to brush the marble beside mine, hands in his coat pockets, collar turned up like he thought it might shield him from the weight of this moment. "I should have said something," he muttered. "Back there, I didn't know what to do." I finally faced him. Douglas Maddox wasn't a cruel man, just careful, quiet. The kind of man who thought inaction was safer than disruption. But silence, as I'd learned, is a kind of weapon too. just slower. I know, I said. He looked up, surprised I didn't lash out. Maybe he expected fury. Maybe he thought he deserved it. But you didn't lose me, I added, voice low. You just stood still while I walked away. His eyes welled a bit and he nodded. Once. Firm. For the first time, he didn't reach for a defense. He didn't offer excuses. That was enough. I walked past him toward the valet line, my heels clicking softly across the stone. My car sat a few feet ahead, already brought around. The trunk popped open with a quiet beep. I opened it and gently placed the manila envelope inside, containing the letters, the receipts, the original contracts, the silence-breaking evidence. I didn't need to carry it anymore. I brought proof, not for revenge, but to finally leave without being erased. I closed the trunk and slid into the driver's seat. The leather was warm. The engine hummed to life, headlights slicing through the dark. Just before shifting into drive, I glanced at my phone on the passenger seat. A red dot blinked. Voicemail. I tapped it. Hi, Ms. Maddox. This is Elise Carter with the Boston Post. We saw the clip from the event tonight. It's powerful. We'd love to feature your voice in an upcoming piece about women who led alone. Are you ready to be seen? I let the message play twice. Not because I needed to hear it again, but because something inside me wanted to savor the moment someone asked, not about what I'd survived, but about what I had done in spite of it. This time, I wasn't answering as a daughter. I was answering as myself. The studio lights were soft but clear, like everything in that space was designed to strip away pretense. The journalist sat across from me, tablet on her knee, mic clipped to her collar. Elise Carter. I'd respected her for years. She didn't chase scandal. She told stories that lingered. We had agreed on no pre-interview, no prepared questions. I wasn't there to perform. I was there to end the echo. We started with the basics: career trajectory, policy work, international negotiations. But then she asked, "Why now?" And I answered with something I hadn't planned to say. Because silence is only noble until it becomes complicity. She blinked, then nodded slowly, scribbling a note. The final question came gently. If you could say one thing to your family, what would it be? I looked at the camera, not at her, not at the crew behind the glass. You can't be erased by people who never wrote your story to begin with. That's what they aired. That sentence. And apparently, that was all it took. The clip spread online like someone had finally exhaled on behalf of every daughter, every veteran, every woman who sat at dinner tables and boardrooms and still felt like a shadow. You spoke what we lived, one woman commented. I'm not invisible anymore, said another. By the end of the week, a student group in Minnesota launched a scholarship in my name, for those who rose despite the silence. And somewhere in Charleston, Vera opened a letter with the city seal embossed in silver. Mayor Strauss had delivered it himself. He didn't linger. The letter read, "Effective immediately, the City of Charleston retracts all prior public statements referring to Zineia Maddox as a lead funder or ambassador to the Global Literacy Initiative. The official record has been corrected." He'd added one handwritten note at the bottom, which he read aloud before leaving. You didn't just lose a daughter, you lost history. I never asked him to do it. Some things don't need to be orchestrated, they just need to be right. 2 weeks later, I stood in my home office in D.C. holding a frame. Inside it, the original check, my signature, and beneath it, a simple plaque that read, "No title required to speak the truth." I declined the promotion the department had quietly offered. I didn't want more power. I wanted impact. I began mentoring junior diplomats from places that didn't get the spotlight. Names no one practiced pronouncing at state dinners. Girls who knew how to carry both resilience and regret in the same breath. I did it not for headlines, but because I remembered what it was like to be told your presence is disruptive, when all you'd done was survive long enough to be seen. That morning, I sat at my kitchen table, coffee cooling beside me. Sunlight spilled across the tile. My phone buzzed. One message. Nominee, Secretary of State Shanley Maddox, Lifetime Civic Honor. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I looked at it for a long time, then I smiled. Not for them, for me. If you've ever been the one they tried to erase, drop a word. I see you now.